Welcome, everyone. Let's see, I know we're probably still got a few people starting to sign in. Let's just take a moment and give them a second to join us. Hope everyone's doing well this evening. Man, the getting dark early is throwing me off. I feel like it should be still a couple hours of daylight and it's dark already. So I'll go ahead and start off. Just want to say thank you, everybody, for joining us, and thank you to our panelists for joining us today. This is a Grow Louisiana webinar where we're talking about growing your farm business, and I'm moderating today with our three panelists, but I'll start with a little bit of an introduction. I'm coming here to you from Acadiana Food Alliance. So I'm based in Lafayette, and my name is Chris Adams. And Acadiana Food Alliance is a nonprofit that started here in Lafayette around 2015, representing the local food system in our Acadiana region, primarily by supporting growers and buyers. And one way we've done that is to collaborate with LSU Ag Center, Market Umbrella, and Sprout NOLA on this Grow Louisiana beginner farmer training program called Grow Louisiana. And additionally, beyond my work with Acadiana Food Alliance, I work with Earthshare Gardens, which is a market garden CSA nonprofit that started around 2005. And since then, we've been operating on 1/2 acre to 1.5 acres organic, sustainable vegetable production, which I helped manage for 2 years, 2018, 2019, with a lot of help from Kim Kulata, who's one of our Grow Louisiana participants. But to the subject of today's webinar, so why focus on farm business instead of just farming practices? And I'd say that for me, and probably any of you that have been in a local farm or sustainable ag community for any length of time, or if you've even just been a regular buyer at your local farmer's market, you'll probably have noticed that we've had many, many small farms come and go over the years. And looking a little closer at those fluctuations and thinking about some of the causes, there's a feeling that farmers are, for the most part, successful at their skills of farming, planting, raising crops, harvesting, but there's a financial success that's sometimes not coming along in step with the success of the farming skills. Clearly, business skills and financial skills are really important to running a successful small farm. And if you have the intention to have income that supports yourself and your family, many folks might have a hobby farm or homestead farms, and they may do this for the pleasure of it or out of necessity, or just because they like raising a good, healthy local food, but they may not intend to make a profit or earn an income. And there's nothing wrong with that approach to farming, but those are not typically the farms who supply to large volume farmers markets or to restaurants or to grocery stores or schools or other institutions. So supporting and building up local farms who can do that, who can supply these larger market outlets and have longevity because of success and hopefully without burnout, that's the goal of this Grow Louisiana program. Because we see that that's where we begin to increase and deepen our impact on the sustainability of our local food system. So enough for introductions on why we're doing this. Now let's talk about our panelists. I would like to ask each panelist to give just a short background, like who were you before you came to sustainable agriculture? I know for myself and a lot of my friends in this field, we had other lives before we ended up in sustainable agriculture. So how did we end up here? And then tell us just briefly about your farm as well. Maybe how large it is, how many years you've been operating, what are some of your major crops, and like how do you primarily sell and where do you mostly sell to? So I'll give a brief introduction to each of you and then ask you to answer those questions, and then I'll move to the next person. Let's start with Compostella Farm. Madeline Yoste is here with us. Compostella is part of the Louisiana farming and market community, but is located in Mississippi. Their organic vegetable farm is in Picayune, an hour's drive from New Orleans. And while organic methods of farming are all they've previously known, they've also lately been adding biodynamic agriculture methods to the repertoire and strive to maintain minimum inputs to their farm. So thank you for joining us, Madeline, and can you give us a little bit of your background and story?
Sure. So pre-farming, I didn't know much about farming growing up. I grew up in New Orleans. I went to Dominican high school, and I left New Orleans to go to college in Oregon. And it was living out in Oregon that I became exposed to a really thriving local farm scene out there. And I met my husband at university out there, and he also became interested in farming. And he was the one who first took the plunge into working on a local farm. And I kind of followed suit, and we both really got into it. So yeah, that was definitely a big influence, was going to a different culture, a different part of the States where the sustainable agriculture movement had really gotten going in the 80s and is really a lot more progressed than where we are here, perhaps. And so to bring that back home with me was really something really cool. I don't know if I'd stayed in this area if I'd really discovered farming the same way or had the same opportunities. But so our farm, Compostella Farm, as you said, we're in Picayune, Mississippi, and it's about 2 acres in production. We specialize in salad greens. My background picture is a scene of our farm there. It's a lot of arugula growing. We do a lot of that. And we sell mostly to restaurants in New Orleans. That's our main outlet. And yes, we use all organic practices. We were certified for a short while when our farm was in Hammond, but we recently moved here to Mississippi about 1.5 years ago. I think maybe I answered all the questions there. Okay.
Yes. Yeah, that's great. Well, maybe also, what I presume you mostly sell into New Orleans. Do you have any other major markets besides the New Orleans area?
Well, one new thing for us in the past few months is we started working with a local distributor called JV Foods. And so for the first time, we're not responsible for our deliveries. And so it also means that our reach has grown a lot because JV Foods will sell into Alabama and Florida, other parts of Louisiana, whereas previously it was just us in our car driving around New Orleans. So it's been New Orleans traditionally, and that's still the majority of our sales, but it's definitely, that's a new world for us working with this local foods distributor this year.
Oh, great. That sounds like it's a big difference. So let's turn now to Major Acre Farm. Thank you, Ellis, Douglas, for being here with us. Briefly, I'll say you're operating a small, diverse vegetable farm in Laplace, which is about 25 miles west of New Orleans. I read that you once described it as a suburban swamp on 5 acres with lots of live oak trees. And you're using techniques made popular by Eliot Coleman, J.M. Fortier, as guidance, but while working within realities of South Louisiana climate, local markets, and your farm layout. So yeah, could you tell us a little bit about your backstory, pre-sustainable agriculture, and then a little bit about your farm and what that looks like right now?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Before being a farmer, I worked in the food service industry. I worked in restaurants and hotels, casinos, private chefing, things like that. And went to culinary school, did all that for like 14 or so years. And similar to, I'm from the area, I'm from Mississippi, and moved to New Orleans to go to culinary school. And then similar to Madeline, moved away to New Mexico. And that was when I first started becoming interested in farming. They had a booming farmers market. It was just like incredible to see compared to just growing up seeing people on the side of the road selling like bunches of turnip greens or, bags of peanuts, or even just the farmers markets in New Orleans currently, or over the past like 10 or 15 years, moving into like a desert area and seeing this like thriving farmers market with just like 50, 60 vendors that in a growing season, that's like a fraction of what we have here. And it was just like incredible to see. And that was the first time I realized like what was lacking here, and like what, like we don't have the same like level of fresh food available. And also just like personally living in that area, in a desert, became more aware of just like lack of resources all around, and became more just like aware of just like how much effort it takes to sustain life. And so when coming back home, I should also mention, during this whole like awakening away from home, I watched that documentary Food Inc. And it like really changed everything for me. I was definitely the target audience, because it's not only just like basic food security for like a household, but like in my line of work was not really contributing to just like natural replenishments of like our resources and like food. Like, just was like, not only in my personal life, but in my work life, I just was like consuming, and just like seeing waste, and just having, just wanting to be more self-sufficient, and just, and like being part of a solution. So I saw that documentary while, kind of just like experiencing everything else. And so when I came home, I wanted to be a part of like a food growing scene, and went looking for farms to work on, and there just wasn't an option. There wasn't a place to learn. There wasn't a place to work. So that's how I ended up kind of becoming a farmer. And so now I'm currently in Laplace on just under 2 acres. We produce just like a wild mix of vegetables. Our main goal is just to have like fresh food every week. So that kind of dictates our whole flow. So that's where we are now.
Great, thanks. And briefly, where are you mostly selling your produce to, and how do you do it? Is it primarily farmers markets in New Orleans, or do you have kind of a mix operation?
Yeah, it's mostly farmers markets in New Orleans, and also restaurants, and to other CSA and farms, and like wholesale distributors.
So it's sounds like a pretty wide mix.
Yeah, it's definitely a diverse revenue stream.
Yeah. Great, and thank you. And let's turn now to Annie Moore. She's here with River Queen Greens. And briefly about her farm, River Queen Greens is primary growing space is a 1/2 acre market garden in urban New Orleans in the Bywater neighborhood, with additional space located on a much larger and more traditional agricultural parcel on the other side of the river in Lower Coast Algiers. And your farm offers fresh and nutrient-dense certified naturally grown vegetables. So thank you, Annie, and welcome. And can you tell us a little bit about your backstory, how you came into farming, and then a little bit about the farm itself?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Chris and Marcus. It's cool to hear Madeline and Ellis's backstories, because we're colleagues, but we haven't really talked that much about the origins. So I have to speak somewhat for my wife, who is the primary farmer with our business. So I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and returned to Brooklyn and thought I would always live there after college. And I met Cheryl, my wife, there. She was not farming when I met her, but she got really into like a nonprofit, like educational garden in Brooklyn, and decided to quit her job because she was sick of taking the subway and, you know, commuting and working indoors and never seeing the daylight. And so she started volunteering almost full time. She sort of did part-time work as well. And then she managed to convince me to leave Brooklyn, which I didn't think was ever possible, but I did it. And we actually moved to New Orleans in 2010, and she continued doing community gardening here and got really interested in becoming a full-time farmer because she loved growing vegetables. And I didn't think that was ever going to be my career path. So then we were here for a year, and then we ended up both moving to Massachusetts. She went to a farm training program called the Farm School in Massachusetts. It's like for sustainable, diversified farm learning program for adults. And I did a grad program in business management and nonprofit business management and public policy. And so then around Boston, and then for a couple of years, I was doing sort of nonprofit management stuff and like social enterprise business management. And Cheryl was managing farms. She managed a farm outside of Boston. And I guess she always knew that she was gonna rope me into farming. I didn't actually really realize that was the plan, but the stars sort of aligned where finally, we always thought we wanted to move back to New Orleans. We really loved being here, but we sort of got stuck in Boston for a while as our like work and school didn't really line up with us having time off or whatever. But we did a road trip where we spent a couple of weeks in New Orleans, and we decided to take the plunge and move down here and start a business together. And I've always loved having Cheryl be a farmer and having all of that fresh food and being able to volunteer. And now it's become a full-time job for me, and it's been the best job I've ever had, for sure. And we sell, you want me to fill this part in? We used to do mostly markets and some small restaurant things with microgreens mostly. But since COVID, we shifted pretty much entirely to doing a CSA, like pre-order farm share system, which I can talk more about if anyone wants to hear about that later.
Great, thank you and welcome. And again, thanks to all three of you for joining us today. Really excited about this conversation. And just wanted to mention, we have a bunch of participants with us today, more than 40 people joining us for this webinar. So thank all of you for joining us as well, for being interested and caring about your local food system and coming here to find out a little bit more about what we can do and how to be successful at it. So let's start into our discussion questions. I gave you a little bit of that context of revenue generating farm and revenue generating as opposed to the idea of like a hobby farmer, or maybe somebody who just comes home at the end of the day and does a little bit of farm work because they like it, but they're not really trying to make a living off of it, or like the homestead approach. And again, all of those are great, but when you're trying to do a revenue generating farm, like why did each of you decide to do that, go into this as a business? Who wants to start?
I'll start.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question. Basically, I wanted to learn how to grow food, and it didn't seem, I don't know if because it didn't seem feasible or because it just wasn't the right fit for me. I wanted to just go all in. Like I feel like if I was going to do it, I needed to like quit my job and like jump in it and do it. And so that was like my main motivation. I mean, my main motivation was what I'd already spoke about, but it was basically like there wasn't anywhere to work. There wasn't, it didn't seem feasible to, I just was like, if I'm going to do this, I have to like create a job out of this because there's no other job opportunity to do it.
Now, you briefly said just now there wasn't anywhere to work. Do you mean like there weren't any other farms that you could just in South Louisiana say like, I'm just going to go work at this farm because I want to get into farming?
Yeah, I mean, I would have had to have moved to another part of the country to have like a full-time or even a part-time farming position. I mean, I guess I could have gone and picked citrus and belches for $8 an hour, but that wouldn't have fulfilled like what it is I was looking for to get out of my work. So yeah.
Yeah. And Madeline, what about you? Like, why choose a farm as a business instead of just doing it as a homestead or you know, after hours or kind of as a hobby?
Well, I guess I've only ever known farming in terms of like a revenue generating farm. I've actually never even had like a garden. I don't know. I'm hoping to have a garden, but I have a feeling I wouldn't be very good at it. Like my whole context and experience of farming has been on revenue generating farms. And when Timothy and I decided to start our own farm in, I guess we started in 2016, it was our main goal actually to create a business that would support us financially and provide both of us full-time income. And, you know, we had kind of an interesting history in Oregon. I worked for 3 years on farms out there. Timothy worked 5 years, and then we both worked on a farm in North Mississippi. And pretty much the scale of all of these organic vegetable farms was about like 15 acres in production, a crew of 6 to 12 farm workers going to farmers markets. One of the farms had a CSA, multiple tractors, transplanting implements, lots of time on the tractor, disking, tilling. It's a big operation. And so that was all we knew. Like when we were, you know, a few years into farming, that was our vision of what a farm was. It was 15 acres. It was a crew. It was a lot, you know, that whole business. And both of these farms that we worked for struggled financially. And that was something that we were very aware of because they were both very transparent about their finances. And, you know, we were apprentices. They were there to teach us everything. So we loved the work, but we also knew that it would be a challenge to make it really be financially sustainable. And it was, I think, in 2014 when the Market Gardener book came out by John Martin Fortier. And I think that he really took Eliot Coleman's approach to farming and put it in like a financial perspective. He pushed the idea that you can make a living farming this way. Whereas of course, Eliot Coleman has been around a long time and his methods have been around a long time. But I think what John Martin did was he took this and said, this is like a revolutionary way to think about like starting your business with low upfront costs, low operating costs, and the ability to bring your vegetables to market and fetch a premium price. And so there's sort of an equation there for financial success. And Timothy and I both read that book and we're just like, you know, light bulb. I think this is how we're going to approach it, you know? So that really changed the way we thought about farming and the business structure. And so far that's what we followed, and it's proven to be working for us so far. So yeah, that was a big focus for us, was financial success on the farm.
Great. Yeah, and it seems like y'all are doing fantastic. And Andy, how about y'all? What's, you know, why do this as a business?
Yeah, I mean, I think just from a really practical standpoint, it's really nice to be able to work for yourself. And it was something that Cheryl had the skills to do, to run a farm, and I had the like business management side of the skill set to be able to just launch it and make it happen. I think also like just it's something that, especially around here, there's a real need for it. Like we thought about a lot of places to start a farm, like when we were sort of knowing that we wanted to leave Massachusetts, and New Orleans was sort of always on the back burner, and then we were looking at other places, and then when we came down here, it was like there's such a demand and not enough supply here. Like we know that like this is a place that there's some education needed still, but I think there's still, I think there's still a lot of people are getting into local sustainable produce in a way that the supply is not even meeting here, versus in Boston, where I like to say you couldn't throw a rock without hitting a CSA. So we just knew that like doing something there wouldn't feel as important as it does down here. And I don't mean to be like a carpetbagger here, because it kind of feels like that's a little bit what we're doing, but we'd also want to make sure that we're really contributing to the economy and to the food system here, which hopefully we are. And then just, working on a farm is just so fulfilling, and being outside is so great. And this, like, the climate here is nice a lot of the time, not all the time. It's just a really fun challenge to take on.
Yeah, and I noticed one thing you mentioned was right at the beginning, that it's nice to be able to work for yourself. I know that's been some of my experience and why it's attractive to move towards farming and trying to make a living off of it. Let's see, my next question is I'm wondering what kind of perspectives or experiences you can share on what it takes to run a successful revenue generating farm. Running a farm and running a business each has its own set of unique challenges. You're trying to do both together. So how do you stay profitable in the farming context?
I can start. I wrote a few notes about this. I think one thing is, like, a lot of people want to start a farm as a side hustle. I don't think that that's going to ever be profitable, unfortunately. I mean, maybe you could do like microgreens or something as like a little side business, but I think for us, we just committed, and I know not everyone can, so that's something that people have to really like check in with themselves and with their family about. But I think it's really important to have at least one person working full time to actually make a go of it. For us, we invested in infrastructure and equipment like quickly. We decided if we're going to do it, we're going to like make it professional, which is something I know not everyone has the capital to do that, but there are ways to, there are certain strategic things that you should be thinking about purchasing. Like you can't just say, oh, I have some ground here and I'm going to start growing things. Like you have to put some money into it to make it feasible.
Do you have just like one or two of those strategic things that you should probably focus on for y'all, for your experience?
Well, I'll say like the things that we started out on a half-acre lot that was just grass. So we knew we needed storage and we needed cold storage. So we purchased a shed and we built a CoolBot cooler inside that shed. We got a really high quality seeder, the Jang seeder. That's something that Cheryl says like she would not want to start a farm without that particular implement. We actually have a whole list of things. We just did a workshop for like people who are interested in farming, like what were sort of the go-to infrastructure and equipment things that were really priority. That's a couple things. A BCS if you're going to be doing like an acre or more. Walk behind tractor. Shall I keep going with my list, or shall I let other people talk?
Yeah, if you've got a couple more things, go right ahead.
Two other quick things. One is, for us, we were growing on a small scale, so it didn't make sense to be growing like crops that took up a lot of space or took up a lot of time. We needed to do high margin things like salad greens that were quick turnover and took a fairly high profit at market. And then also you want to make sure that you know what market you're going to be selling to before you before you start seeding. Make sure that there are people
Yeah.
who want to buy that food that you're growing.
I'm curious if there's any specific, like your degree background of management, if there's something that you pulled from that in thinking about the farm as a business, that anything that comes to mind.
I mean, it was nonprofit business management, so it's like a little different, but like there's a lot of like random stuff that I got from that, but I don't know if there's like one key thing that I could tell you as a learning moment. It definitely helps just in terms of thinking about like bookkeeping, things like that are just like practical things that I got from that program that I had never done before.
Right.
It's good to keep your books well.
Thank you.
Sure.
I can jump in next.
Great.
One perspective that we like to bring is to be flexible. When we were starting our farm, we had, taken the step of writing up a business plan while we were still working our last season at our last farm job. And, our business plan looked like what we had experienced. We were going to grow a diverse mix of vegetables. We were going to go to 2 markets a week for the first year, build up a clientele. Then we were going to start a CSA. And that was kind of like our, 2-year startup plan. And, that's what we knew. That's kind of the business model we knew, and that's what we were going to follow. Before we moved down to start our farm, we through a connection from some Oregon friends, were introduced to a woman who lived in New Orleans and worked for a restaurant group and worked as a local food forager, sourcing local foods for the group of restaurants. And I drove down from Tupelo that weekend and had lunch with her, and she handed us this spreadsheet that was all the crops they were looking to source, how much they would use per week, and the price that they were willing to pay for each crop. And I looked at that, I was like, wow, this is like essentially a business plan. Like, this is a crop plan right here. Grow these crops this much, this is how much you'll sell them for. And so we noticed that on the list was salad greens. She said she wasn't really able to find a local source of baby greens like arugula. And so we had some experience with that, and it seemed like a sort of easy entry for us. And we said, well, why don't we start here? Like, this will be our first few months. We'll grow these salad greens and sell them to this group. And then we'll kind of get our business plan going. And essentially they wanted more, and then word spread to other restaurants. And then before you know it, 5 years later, we're basically growing arugula and other salad mixes. And so, I think following the market is maybe how you might frame that, if you're so inclined. For us, like I said, financial security was a big driving factor for us. And so when we saw a sale, like an account with a kind of a given sale, we were very much drawn to that, and we followed that. And we tend to, that's how we tend to choose the crops that we grow, is knowing that there's going to be an outlet for them. And so that's just being flexible. If you're like, this is what my farm is going to look like, I'm going to grow these crops, I'm going to sell this many of this, that's fine too, if that's really your vision and that's what you need to follow. But I guess just from lessons from our perspective for a revenue generating farm is it can be wise to follow the market.
Great. Thanks for sharing that. And Ellis, what comes to mind for you? What are some of those experiences you can share about, maintaining profitability and running a farm at the same time?
Yeah, I guess my perspective is a kind of a benefit to certainly. Sorry, if you hear that. My window is open. the flexibility is a huge thing because there are so many unknowns in farming, between the weather and bugs and whether or not someone's going to buy something or not. So I kind of have adopted this like on-farm flexibility, off-farm consistency that is I kind of like check in with. A lot of times I have like a list of, I have a crop plan and I have like a list of things to do every week and then every day. But stuff happens, like I get tired or it's like too wet or just like anything. So it's important to me to just stay flexible. Sometimes the window of like getting a task done closes. And so then to like have like a rotation of like other things to plug in. So it's just all about being flexible, but then off farm, being consistent, like not, for me, it's also like under promising and over delivering. Like I would rather have more than I say than less. And if I have like a specific account or like showing up at market is one reason why it's a good fit for me, because I can just show up with what I have and like there's going to be people coming through and they can either buy it or not buy it, but like they know they can come there and I'm going to be there with vegetables. So being there consistently, no matter what the weather is, or if it's a holiday or not, just being consistent so people can depend on me, and then I can then depend on them. Also, keeping low debt is like a big part of my farm business plan. It helps me to like weather the weeks if we get like too much rain or a freeze or just a crappy market day, like knowing that we're not going to have like go bankrupt essentially. And so the way that we've done that here is just gradually add to our inventory and like every year invest. Like we started off we didn't get started with Jane. We started off with an earthway seeder and spent hours weeding or thinning turnips. But then we sold those carrots and turnips and bought a Jane seeder. And then for me, that was less stressful. Just knowing that if we have a bad week, we're not gonna all. So that's kind of, for me, really that's the biggest thing, is just not taking on more debt than we can pay in a season, and a season being like, I'm starting the seeds, like if I, within three months from now, if I'm not having that come back to me, then, we need to like, we're not buying any tool to like help things be more efficient, that type of mentality. Also, my partner, both my business partner and my life partner, has an off-farm job that's full-time. And so that's a huge, well, it wasn't a big part of the startup. Now at this point, the farm is completely self-sustainable and practically free. But in the first 2.5 years, it was like, it would have been impossible, unless I was like living in a tent on my farm, it would have been impossible to sustain without that off-farm income.
That relates to an additional question I have for each of you, which is, do you pay yourself for your own labor? Do you factor your own labor as part of your operating costs? Or do you like work for free and then live off of the profits? How do you make that distinction, or do you? And Ellis, you might as well start since you are already talking, but I'd like to hear also from each of the others.
I do not have a designated income. I try to run as much as my needs through the business account. So like my cell phone bill, car insurance, like things like that I would be paying for if I had a job, I run through as a business account. And at the end, and then like it's kind of just based, we have our tax structure is set up as like a partnership. So the way that works is then at the end of the year, like whatever profits you have. So like whatever our expenses aren't, that's considered my income. So I just live very thriftily throughout the year. And whatever profit I have, I just save that. That's only and spend that or use that. But I'm still at the very beginning stages of my like farm plan. And so the idea is, you know, I'm in my 4th year now. So the idea is like later down the road, that will be different. But, you know, like any new business, farming business is extremely like way more harder, but any new business is going to be like a squeeze in the first few years if you want it to be financially.
Yeah. And what about y'all, Madeline, or Annie?
Yeah, we have a designated owner's draw amount that we take out each month because, you know, we have our monthly costs of our mortgage and our groceries and bills to pay. And so similar to what Ellis was saying, though, we are also a LLC partnership. And so, you know, the profits pass through and we're taxed as individuals, and that's seen as our income. So, you know, we have a weekly sales goal, and we know if we're hitting that goal. We've been in business long enough that we have like a pretty good idea of what our profit margin is. And so we know if we're hitting that sales goal, then we're covering ourselves. And at the end of our season, if there's extra money over, you know, what we pay ourselves, and we have like a minimum in the bank account we don't want to ever go below. If there's extra there, then we'll look at investing in the farm, either through equipment or projects, or putting funds into our retirement accounts as well. So we see that as our money. And so we pay ourselves what we need every month. And then when there's extra, we can take a vacation, or we can buy a tool, or that's kind of how we handle it.
And yeah, and Annie, if you feel comfortable, yeah.
We do not pay ourselves salary, although I have considered having Cheryl have a salary. Where we do have other people working for us, so basically all of our like profit has gone to like expanding. So you said I think whatever you were reading on our website probably should be updated at this point. The West Bank is actually our primary growing area. We're on over an acre there. And so we've just hired some apprentices to keep expanding that. So most of our profit goes into just expansion and investing in other people's work. But yeah, I think ideally we would do an owner's draw, like what Madeline and Timothy are doing. I think that's a goal for maybe I don't know what year we're in, year 4 or 5.
Well, so that relates into the next set of questions, which are like, what are reasonable financial expectations for the first like couple of years, 1, 2, 3 years? You know, could a farm expect to pay for all of its labor, including your own labor, as well as any labor that you're hiring, and equipment and materials, all of those costs each year? Should you expect to be able to pay all of that from your income right off the bat from the first year onwards? Or, you know, what does that look like the first couple of years, in your opinion, or from your experience?
I remember filing taxes after our first year of farming, and I was so excited to do so. I'm a little nerdy in that way, and it was really fun. And I remember coming to the end of the form, and I've gone through all the steps, and it was a negative number. So I was like, okay, we don't have to pay any taxes. I would say your first year of farming, it's probably expected that you will be spending more than you make, especially because that's going to be the first year when you're incurring a lot of your startup costs, and you're first getting into your markets and exploring them, and making connections and making sales, and learning the ropes of your new land, and what challenges wait there. The reason that we had money to pay our rent, even with a negative number at the end of the year is because we went into starting our farm with some savings. We had been saving to start our own farm basically for the previous four years. And so we had put away money for the sole purpose of purchasing our startup equipment and the things we needed, and also to have money to live on, especially for those first months when you're not even making any sales yet. And also just as you're getting your business going, and maybe you're not breaking even yet. But I think beyond that, I was looking at our profit and loss statements before this when I saw this question. Our sales doubled the second year, and they've continued to go up since then. So I think you should expect the first year to be rough, and if you're doing a good job and finding your markets and growing your vegetables and connecting with customers, I think you can expect your sales to increase. And I think it also has a lot to do with what Annie was saying about your market. We similarly were in Oregon thinking about starting a farm, and we were like, who would buy our vegetables? There's a waiting list for the farmer's market. You can't throw a rock without hitting an organic farm. Like, all our friends are farmers, or they're already members of other farmers' CSAs. Like, it was so competitive. And we also saw New Orleans as a good market, a need for local foods. And so it felt like there was an opening there. So I would say that's definitely a part of the business strategy. If you're out there competing for a really small slice of the pie, I don't know if your sales will double your second year. But so I just think that's an important thing to consider when you are doing your business plan and preparing to take the dive into your first year of farming.
Great, thanks. And I'll just add a plug that we see the same thing in Lafayette, that there's way more demand here than there is supply. And I'm sure the same is true in lots of our nearby regions. How about Ellis or Annie?
I'm just thinking about how Madeline and Timothy set up and how they were able to be profitable after 2 years. And I think that they've done an amazing job streamlining their operation, where they grow greens and they grow them really well, and restaurants want those greens. And it's a pretty simple business model, right? Like, they basically have like 2 or 3 products that are like super high margin, high value, people like high demand, right? Like, and you only need like one piece of equipment for it. You don't need to have like 10 different specialty things for all of these different things that you're growing. So I think that they've just done a really smart business, like, way to be successful quickly. For us, like, that's sort of how we started. We started really focusing on greens, but our goal has always been to be more diversified. And so that's what we're doing now with our CSA. We just have a lot more variety, which is like what we want to do from like where our hearts are, but it's not necessarily the most like financially, I mean, there's definitely some advantages of it. Like, if you have a bad crop with arugula, you can make up for it with your kale or whatever. But I think that having something, especially when you're like in that sort of iffy period in the beginning, when you have all these startup costs, I think it makes a lot of sense to sort of focus on one thing and get really good at it, where you know there's a market. And then you can sort of think about other ways that you can diversify or whatever. I mean, I would say for us, we were able to hire someone full-time in like the second year or something. Like, and that person's costs were covered by the operation. So on half an acre in the city, pretty much. Yeah, I think full-time by year.
Right.
Yeah, so that's sort of my benchmark for like, if we were paying we opted to pay someone else and then to use our time and effort elsewhere. But I think if you were just doing a one-person operation, I think by the second year you could do it.
And Ellis, what's your experience been like with that first couple of years, and what's reasonable to expect? Being able to pay your costs, or you already spoke about trying to avoid debt in particular. So yeah, how does that play out for you, or what would you suggest for folks?
Yeah, the first couple years were really, really hard. Like there's a lot of learning curve. I'm also a beginning farmer. So there was just a lot of hard lessons learned. So I just want to say that first. It was hard. Like pretty much turnips and radishes was my most successful crops, and that was also the only thing that we were eating, because that's it. But yeah, keeping the initial debt low and starting small, and it wasn't until really the end of the third season that we started to feel a little bit of relief of like, okay, once we get out of summer break, we're not going to be going into fall, like relying on each week to like pay for the next week. And so, yeah, it was, so 2.5 seasons of just making it work, trying to squeeze everything out of each bed, and a lot of mistakes and a lot of turnips and radishes, and an off-farm income was what was our experience.
Great. And so that wraps up our first section of questions. We now have time. It's about 6:50. We're going till about 7:15, so we've still got about 25 minutes where we can go into additional topics. If any of you, the panelists, want to bring up some specific topics that are on your mind, and also if any of you that are listening in and have questions, you can use the chat box and type in some questions there. And then I've got a list of extra questions here as well. So I'll start just by opening it up to the three of you. Does anybody have some topic that's on your mind that you want to make sure to convey or communicate?
Yeah,
I guess oh, go ahead, Ellis.
I was just going to say, I feel strongly about sharing that. For me, going into a farming business for profit, I went into it, with this idea that I was like contributing to like a solution, and like I was going to be working outside and everything was going to be nice. And I didn't factor in how it would feel to have a passion so closely tied to capitalism and people who can afford produce and people who can't afford produce. And that's really impacted my overall view of our like local farming system. And so I just want people to consider that if they're going into it, like there's a bigger system at play that we're only scratching the surface at. And it's challenging to be in that.
Yeah, that touches on some kind of personal aspect topics. Finding yourself in your farm and in your farming practice.
Well, just if you're relying on a business and a revenue things, there may be some, if you have a long-term like business and like monetary attachment to that. I'm just saying because I didn't go into it with that mindset. I just became aware of it. And so if, so I'm just throwing that out there as, something that has come up for me.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Madeline.
Yeah, I was, my comment was just going to piggyback on the question we had just talked about about the financial expectations. And I guess I did just want to contextualize that the three of us here pretty much all farm in a similar small scale. And I think that is one of the things that made market gardening such an attractive and explosive trend in the farming world is that farming a small area with a smaller piece of equipment like a BCS tractor means that you can actually start a farm business with pretty low upfront investment, and like Ellis was saying, even minimal debt. When we were first thinking about starting a farm back in 2014, before we discovered that book, we were planning out the investment of 2 tractors and all the implements and how much it would cost to rent 15, 20 acres of land, and the crew we would employ, and the real financial stress that would happen that first year when you're paying people's wages from day one and you have tens of thousands, maybe $100,000 in debt that you'll be paying off for years. So I will just say that I think that is a big reason that small scale farming or market gardening has been so attractive to people, is that you don't need such a huge amount of resources or to go into such a huge amount of debt. You can go that direction later, but it's a nice way to start when you want to get into the business of farming, especially as a revenue generating farm, and you don't want to just go really deep into debt right off the bat.
And so what, and maybe this is to any of the 3 of you, what are maybe the 2 or 3 like most expensive startup costs that you encountered or that you would recommend to somebody to be prepared to pay for?
For us, it was our walk behind tractor and the implements. I think we were able to get an entire machine setup, tractor, mower, tiller, all the things we need for about $10,000, which is incredibly cheap compared to the alternative riding tractors. And like I was just talking about, it's very affordable. But that was definitely our biggest cost going in.
How about Annie? I know that y'all invested a fair bit and pretty quickly. Do you have maybe the couple largest expenses coming to mind?
Yeah, in the BCS, we bought that shed. We could have built it ourselves probably, but it needed to be, we were in the city of New Orleans and it had to fit with zoning codes and it had to be hurricane proof for 135-mile-an-hour winds.
Yeah.
But yeah, those are probably the 2 biggest things in the first year. One thing that I do want to mention is we also have a hoop house, and I know Ellis does too. And there are grants through the NRCS to fund that. So that's something for people to be aware of. I saw someone asked about farm grants on these things. So the NRCS has a bunch of different programs that help. It's a cost sharing grant. That's the EQUIP grant, NRCS, that funds hoop houses, and it's based on square footage, the amount you get. But if you build it yourself, which for us, we built it ourselves, and it covered the whole cost because we weren't paying for labor. But that was, that would have been one of the bigger items if we hadn't gotten the grant to pay for it.
Right, and that's a really popular grant that a lot of farmers have taken advantage of, and that NRCS seems to continue to have a pretty deep pot of money to fund those grants to help farmers set up hoop houses, which is like a greenhouse, but it's not a greenhouse. It covers the ground without a base. A greenhouse would have like a concrete or gravel floor or some kind of floor, and you grow above the ground. A hoop house, you're actually growing in the ground under the protective visqueen covering or whatever kind of covering you have. And actually, since we're talking about grants, are there any other grants that any of the 3 of you have used? NRCS does that grant, and they do a couple of others related to kind of the farm landscape.
Yeah, we're getting funding for, I forget what it's called, CSP. It's the
Conservation.
Yeah.
Something plan.
Yeah. So it's going to help fund a bunch of seeds for native beneficial flowers and things like that. It'll help pay for some fruit trees and other native trees. I think there's some other stuff. Oh, cover crop. It helps pay for cover crop seed too. Yeah, that's one that I know that we just got approved for it. We're also getting the NRCS, the EQIP grant. I think every farm has up to $20,000. So we only use like $4,000 for our first one. So we're actually going to be using the funding for that to get caterpillar tunnels, which is like a smaller, more mobile hoop house. It doesn't have to be small. It's not as tall, but you can have like 100-foot caterpillar tunnels, and they're way cheaper and they're way easier to assemble, and it has the same functionality as a hoop house. And I think that the EQIP program just like shipped. We asked John Boatman, who's our NRCS representative, when we first started talking to him about caterpillar tunnels, and he said that we couldn't use that funding for it, but now we can. So that's an update.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
We just got funding to drill a well for irrigation through NRCS.
It seems like NRCS is the major source of grants that farmers can get, and they're mostly with not the planting of crops themselves, but kind of all the rest of the kind of farm support operation.
I think there's some to help with livestock management too, like fencing and like.
Their main purpose is natural resource conservation, usually more land-based funding. I also got one of the CSP grants and I was able to utilize that in a way that was kind of cool. I have one part of my farm that like just floods incredibly whenever we get more than 3 inches of rain. And so I was able to get funding to turn that into a wildlife or a beneficial insect and butterfly sanctuary. And then the NRCS pays for all the seed and manage that. And so that space that was otherwise just like not used is being utilized and funded. One of the hoop houses that Anna mentioned.
Let's see, I'm taking a look at some of these other questions. Thank you all participants for putting in some in the Q&A, and I've got a few here. I was gonna ask one from my list. Can you realistically start a farm without having to borrow money or without having to already have a big pot of savings? What do you think about that?
No, I mean, it takes investment into the space in order to turn it into something. I think that if in the right market and like without, like I said, just like starting small and like letting the business grow itself, you can like come out relatively free sooner, but it's gonna take money from somewhere to just thing to like an operation. I'm from BCS, which is one of my more expensive startup costs. I finance, so I have about 10 grand funds, and my BCS was definitely one of the most expensive things, but I only put 3 grand down on that, and then had like $100 a month payments, which I've now paid off. But then that like kept some funds open to be able then to like invest in irrigation, which was my next most expensive thing. But definitely, in order to have like a professional, consistent front for your business, for people to take you seriously, it requires.
One thing I wanted to ask that hasn't quite been touched on is land cost itself. Because land, especially if you're buying in the city of New Orleans, but even other areas, can be quite expensive. What's been y'all's approach related to land cost in terms of your farm business?
Well, we're lucky that our urban farm is rent-free. It's people that we know own it. So we haven't actually had to pay any rent for that, which is huge. And that's, I know a lot of people have issues with landowners on urban farms. So we're just lucky in that location. And then we were able to purchase property in Orleans Parish, and I know a lot of people can't do that. I think probably Madeline and Timothy have the most recent experience sort of shopping around for land outside of the city.
Yeah, when we first got started, you know, we were looking for land just to rent, and we were looking on the North Shore around Covington, Hammond area, and it was very difficult to find land just in general. Like finding a plot to rent was just like a weird thing that, like, I don't know, wasn't available, it wasn't on the market. You tried to find, you know, like horse pastures we were like inquiring about, and people are like, what are you gonna do? You're gonna tear it up, you know? So we eventually were able to start our farm on some family friend land that we were allowed to use for rent-free, and started looking for land to purchase. And we did find that basically within an hour of New Orleans, we weren't looking to farm in the city, but more on the North Shore area. And within an hour of the city, price of land is just incredibly expensive. I think it's because of its real estate value. We tried looking for a land trust to work with. We tried finding different creative avenues to get affordable farmland close to the city, which is what farmers want. They want to be near their markets. But it was nearly impossible until we had the bright idea to look across the state line, and Mississippi was a lot more affordable than Louisiana was. And that's kind of how we ended up here in Mississippi, was just basically the price of land was so much lower, and we found our location here was closer than any place on the North Shore. So we were very happy with that. But it's a real challenge having land near your markets, just because of the real estate development value. People want to cash in and not have it go to waste.
Yeah, I lease the land that I farm on, and we're outside of New Orleans. We're in Laplace, and it was. We also had a similar like luck of situation where around the time that I was getting out of my farming internship, a friend had purchased some property outside of the city, and there was a large like pasture in the backyard, and so that was like a trusted ownership tenant scenario to go into before investing on property with unknown landlord situation. The problem where like we came into was like determining a fair. He was approaching it more as like a like a value of what, like how does he place a value on like what I'm gonna value from it, versus what the USDA and like even Louisiana there is like farm rent guidelines. It's not geared towards this like small market garden style, high revenue. It's more just for like hay or just like field like row crops and stuff like that. So actually, when I turned in my rent, my farm rent, the USDA, they sent out like surveys of like what you're paying for rent, and I got a call. Someone was concerned that I was overpaying. They were like, "Do you know that you should be?" They're like, "Is this a year or a month? Because you should be paying this for a year, not for a month." So I appreciated that call. Didn't do anything for our situation, but yeah. So that was for us, it was the trickiest part, was like negotiating rent, because basically that's just kind of open for interpretation.
Right. Let's see, I'm looking at some of our participant questions. There's two that jump out at me. the first one I was thinking about, each of you maybe speak a little bit about the best way to build connections with restaurants or distributors, or just broadly, like how do you make those connections to get your product to market, and how do you keep those relationships? Madeline, do you want to start?
I can speak to our experience with restaurants. We walk into the kitchens with samples and a price list, and we try to leave with a phone number or an email address so you can follow up with them, or else you probably will never hear from them. But if you follow up, they'll usually place an order. So it's really tough for me. It's made me really nervous to just like walk into a kitchen and be like, who's the chef, but that's what we did, and it really seems to work. People really appreciated those visits, and there was only one bad experience I can think of out of many, many very good ones. So that's one way to do it.
Annie, what about y'all? I know you've sold a fair bit to restaurants.
Yeah, we sold to some restaurants, but restaurants are definitely not our priority. We've always prioritized retail, partially because it's, for large part because it's just higher margin, and we had the labor to like go to market. But I also, Cheryl is super anti-dealing with chefs because they're so, I'm glad to hear that Compostella has had a really good experience with it. Like, they're so they never call you back. They're so picky about what they get. They're just a pain in the ass, and it's way easier just to bring stuff to market and have people get what you bring to market. Like, it's just so much just less to deal with from the like. I understand the value of working with restaurants too, and it's nice to have that other outlet, but it's just never been our priority. But when we have sold to restaurants, either it's like through word of mouth, someone might contact us and say, oh, I had your greens at the market, do you sell them to restaurants? Or we'll be eating at a restaurant and maybe we'll be like, oh, hey, would you ever want to buy microgreens from us or something? But pretty casual. I've never gone into the restaurant and like done a sale.
Ellis, what about you? I think you talked about a whole host of different kind of market outlets, not just restaurants.
Yeah, pre-COVID, restaurant sales made up half of my revenue. And because of my background and working in restaurants for 14 years before starting my farm, contacts like right out the door, and relationships. So they were very supportive in the beginning. Like, that was a lot of my sales, but since then it's evolved, and I would say like they're not even the people I sell to anymore. And that all happened basically just word of mouth. Again, just having like a consistent quality product, and the chefs they just find me, and there's it's kind of like I don't have enough to supply to the restaurants at this point.
Yeah, I think I just want to reiterate what Ellis just said, and also our experience. I think being a presence like at a market, like we got a lot of chefs buying from us at the Tuesday Uptown Market because they were coming and looking for local produce, and they would buy from us there. I think it's easier in some respects to just like to show up, and then people will come to you than like try to tell them who you are.
Right. So that market presence, even though it's a public market, chefs are still shopping there, at least in some cases, and just being that regular booth at the market with good quality, consistent produce does its own selling. One thing I wanted to extend that with Madeline, distributors. You talked about recently shifting that way with JB Foods. How different is that to be selling in that market?
Well, we chose to do it because Timothy and I are the only two people working on this farm, and we were getting to a certain scale where we were just starting to feel like a little burnt out, like a little like we were just shouldering too much, doing all of the prepping, seeding, harvesting, washing, delivering, invoicing, communicating with all the different restaurants and things like that. And so to work with a distributor, our goal was to take a few of those tasks off of our shoulders, namely delivering and communicating, invoicing, chasing down checks, that whole part of the business, and to then just have more time to be better growers. You know, we felt like there were tasks that were just always getting deferred and we wanted to be doing, and then also just to better quality of life, a little more space. And so I would say that, you know, we've only been doing this 2.5 months. And so it's very early on in the process. It's definitely been a learning curve, and it's been kind of crazy at times, just handing that, you know, like we're used to having total control over things coming from our farm going directly to the person. Like we hand it off and we know the quality's good, we know it's fresh. And so it's been interesting working with them. They're also a young company, so I think they have their own internal challenges in terms of organization and getting things done. And so it's been a little bit of a challenge. It's been but I think so far we're definitely seeing the benefits that we wanted to see. We have more time. We're not each spending a full day driving around doing deliveries. I'm not always on my phone or computer answering texts and emails and taking orders. And so as for our farming operation, nothing has really changed that much. We've had to standardize and start package in boxes and having just a little more like professionalism in terms of like fitting into, you know, stuff goes on a truck, it has to be in a box and it has to be standardized and things like that. But yeah, overall it's been good. And I'm hopeful that all the kinks are going to get ironed out and we're going to enjoy it even more.
Great. Well, I see that we've reached just a bit past our 7:15 in time. So I wanted to say thank you again to all the participants for coming, to Ellis and Andy and Madeline for being our panel discussion this evening. Also wanted to say thanks to Marcus Coleman. He's the program coordinator for Grow Louisiana, and he got us all very organized before we started here this evening. And thank you, Marcus. And also thanks to Dr. Carl Matzenbacher, LSU Ag Center, who helped get this grant together in the first place, which led to our Grow Louisiana program. So yeah, thank you everybody for tonight and this great discussion.